Maria Santos wiped the sweat from her forehead as she hung the last of the laundry on the line behind her small adobe house. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and dust across the valley, and she could hear her son Miguel playing quietly near the well. At 12 years old, Miguel rarely spoke, but his dark eyes missed nothing. The townspeople of San Rafael whispered that the boy was touched by spirits, that his silence held power they couldn't understand. The morning had started like any other in the small border settlement of 1847. Maria's husband Carlos had left before dawn to check their small herd of cattle in the hills, leaving her alone with Miguel and their simple life. She had no way of knowing that this day would change everything, that by sunset her world would be torn apart by forces beyond her control. The first sign of trouble came when Miguel suddenly stopped playing and stood perfectly still, his head tilted toward the eastern hills. Maria had learned to trust her son's unusual awareness. While other children chattered and laughed, Miguel seemed to hear things that others missed. He would often sense approaching storms hours before clouds appeared, or know when visitors were coming long before they could be seen on the horizon. "Miguel, what is it?" Maria called softly, but her son remained frozen, his small body tense with concentration. Then she heard it too, the distant thunder of many horses approaching fast. Her heart began to race as she remembered the stories that had been circulating through the territory. American soldiers were pushing westward, claiming Mexican lands for their expanding nation. There had been skirmishes, raids, and rumors of worse things to come. Miguel ran to his mother's side just as a cloud of dust appeared on the eastern ridge. Soon Maria could make out the shapes of riders, not Mexican vaqueros or American cavalry, but something far more dangerous. These were Apache warriors, their faces painted for war, their horses moving with deadly purpose across the desert floor. The sight struck terror into Maria's heart. The Apache had been quiet for months, but everyone knew that peace with them was always fragile. The encroachment of white settlers and the chaos of the Mexican-American War had disrupted the delicate balance that had kept the region relatively calm. Now it seemed that balance had finally shattered. The warriors spread out as they approached the settlement, surrounding the scattered houses with military precision. Maria grabbed Miguel's hand and pulled him toward their small adobe home, hoping to find shelter or perhaps escape through the back. But it was too late. The Apache had moved too quickly, cutting off all routes of retreat. The leader of the war party was a fierce-looking man with streaks of white paint across his cheekbones and eagle feathers in his long black hair. He rode directly toward Maria's house, his horse's hooves kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. Behind him, the other warriors maintained their positions, creating an impenetrable circle around the settlement. Miguel pressed close to his mother's side, but Maria noticed something strange. While she trembled with fear, her usually timid son seemed oddly calm. His dark eyes watched the approaching Apache with what looked almost like recognition, though Maria knew that was impossible. Her son had never seen Apache warriors before, had never been outside their peaceful valley. The war leader dismounted near their front door and spoke in accented but clear Spanish. "Woman, where are the men of this place?" His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Maria's voice caught in her throat as she tried to answer. "My husband is with the cattle in the hills. The other men went to Santa Fe for supplies. Please, we have done nothing to harm your people." The Apache leader studied her for a long moment, then his gaze shifted to Miguel. Something flickered in the warrior's eyes as he looked at the silent boy. He spoke again, this time in Apache, his words flowing like water over stones. To Maria's amazement, Miguel's head tilted slightly as if he was listening intently to something he could almost understand. "The boy," the war leader said, switching back to Spanish. "He has the look of one who listens to the spirits. This is good. You will both come with us." Terror flooded through Maria as she realized what was happening. "Please, no. We are simple people. We have little of value. Take what you want and leave us in peace." But the Apache leader had already turned away, barking orders to his warriors. Within minutes, Maria and Miguel found themselves lifted onto horses, their few precious possessions left scattered on the ground. As they rode away from the only home Miguel had ever known, Maria clutched her son close and prayed to every saint she could remember. The war party moved swiftly across the desert, following ancient trails that wound between towering rock formations and through hidden canyons. Maria had never traveled so far from home, and the landscape became increasingly wild and unfamiliar. The Apache warriors rode in silence, their faces grim with purpose. As the hours passed, Maria began to notice something remarkable about her son. While she swayed uncertainly on the horse, fighting motion sickness and terror, Miguel seemed to ride as naturally as if he had been born to it. His small hands gripped the horse's mane with confidence, and his body moved in rhythm with the animal's gait. Even more puzzling was the way the Apache warriors treated him. Though they showed Maria the basic respect due to a captive who was not resisting, they looked at Miguel with something that might have been curiosity, or even reverence. When they stopped to rest the horses, one of the younger warriors offered Miguel water first, before attending to the adults. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, the war party reached their destination. Hidden in a box canyon surrounded by towering red cliffs was an Apache camp unlike anything Maria had imagined. Instead of the crude shelters she had expected, she saw well-organized groups of traditional wickiups arranged in careful patterns. Women moved efficiently between cooking fires while children played under the watchful eyes of elders. This was not a temporary raiding camp, Maria realized with growing dread. This was a permanent settlement, a stronghold where the Apache could live according to their ancient ways while remaining hidden from their enemies. As they rode into the camp, dozens of curious faces turned to study the new arrivals. The war leader dismounted and spoke rapidly to an elderly woman who appeared to be a person of great importance. Her hair was silver white, and her weathered face held the wisdom of many seasons. She listened intently, then approached Miguel's horse and looked up at the boy with keen, intelligent eyes. What happened next would haunt Maria's dreams for years to come. The old woman spoke a single word in Apache, and Miguel responded. Not in Spanish, not in any language Maria had ever heard him use, but in what sounded unmistakably like Apache. The boy, who had barely spoken a dozen words in his entire life, had somehow answered the tribal elder in her own tongue. The elderly Apache woman circled Miguel's horse slowly, her sharp eyes never leaving the boy's face. Maria watched in growing confusion and fear as her son, who had never spoken more than a few words at a time in Spanish, began to communicate with the tribal elder in what seemed to be fluent Apache. The conversation was brief but intense, filled with gestures and expressions that Maria had never seen from her quiet child. The woman, who Maria would later learn was called Grandmother Moon by the tribe, finally stepped back and spoke to the war leader in rapid Apache. Her words caused a ripple of excitement through the gathering crowd of warriors and villagers. Children pushed forward to get a better look at Miguel, while the adults exchanged meaningful glances and whispered among themselves. "What is happening?" Maria demanded, her voice shaking with fear and confusion. "What are you saying about my son?" The war leader turned to her with an expression that had shifted from simple authority to something approaching awe. "The grandmother says your boy carries the mark of the thunder spirits. She says he has walked between two worlds since birth, waiting for the time when he would be called home." Maria felt her world spinning out of control. "Home? This is not his home. We are Mexican people. We have never had anything to do with your tribe." But even as she spoke the words, doubts began to creep into her mind. She thought of all the strange things about Miguel that she had never been able to explain. His uncanny ability to sense weather changes, the way animals seemed drawn to him, how he could find lost objects that others had searched for in vain. The townspeople had always whispered that there was something different about her son, something that went beyond his usual silence. Grandmother Moon approached Maria's horse and spoke in careful Spanish. "Long ago, before you were born, there was much mixing between our peoples. Not all unions were recorded in your churches or remembered in your histories. The spirits do not forget even when people do." The implications of the old woman's words hit Maria like a physical blow. Could it be possible that somewhere in Miguel's bloodline there was Apache heritage that she knew nothing about? Her own family history was murky. Her grandmother had been an orphan who appeared in San Rafael as a young girl with no memory of her origins. As if sensing his mother's turmoil, Miguel turned in his seat and looked directly at her. For the first time in his 12 years of life, she saw something new in his dark eyes. Not fear or confusion, but a kind of peaceful recognition, as if he had finally found something he had been searching for without even knowing it. The war party leader, whose name was Red Wolf, gestured for both captives to dismount. "You will be treated with honor while you are with us," he told Maria. "But understand this, we did not take you by accident. The spirits guided us to your house on this day. There are no coincidences in the desert. Maria and Miguel were led to a small wickiup at the edge of the camp. The structure was simple but comfortable, made of bent wooden poles covered with animal hides and brush. Inside, woven mats covered the floor and a small fire pit provided warmth and light. 2 Apache women brought them food: roasted meat, ground corn cakes, and water flavored with desert plants. As night fell over the hidden canyon, Maria tried to make sense of their situation. She had expected violence, perhaps death, but instead found herself treated more like a guest than a prisoner. The Apache women who attended them were respectful, even kind, and Miguel seemed completely at ease in their presence. "Miguel," she whispered as they prepared to sleep. "What did you say to the old woman? How did you know their language?" Her son was quiet for a long time, staring up at the smoke hole in the roof where stars were becoming visible. When he finally spoke, his voice was clearer and more confident than she had ever heard it. "I do not know, Mama." The words just came like they were always there waiting. That night, Maria lay awake listening to the sounds of the Apache camp. She could hear the soft murmur of voices around distant fires, the occasional laugh of children, and the ever-present whisper of wind through the canyon. It was not the savage encampment she had been taught to fear, but a community of families living according to traditions that stretched back countless generations. The next morning brought new revelations. Miguel woke before dawn and wandered outside the wickiup, drawn by sounds that Maria could not identify. She followed him and discovered her son standing perfectly still, watching a group of Apache boys practicing with small bows. The instructor was a middle-aged warrior who noticed Miguel's interest and beckoned him forward. What happened next defied everything Maria thought she knew about her son. The warrior handed Miguel a bow sized for a child, showed him how to hold it properly, and guided his hands as he nocked an arrow. On his very first attempt, Miguel's arrow flew straight and true, striking a target that the other boys had been struggling to hit all morning. The Apache children cheered and gathered around Miguel, chattering excitedly in their own language. To Maria's amazement, her son seemed to understand much of what they were saying, responding with gestures and simple Apache words that came to him as naturally as breathing. Grandmother Moon appeared at Maria's side, her weathered face showing satisfaction rather than surprise. "The blood remembers what the mind forgets," she said simply. "Your son's spirit has been calling to us across the desert for many seasons. Now he has come home to learn what he needs to know." "Learn what?" Maria asked, though she was beginning to fear the answer. "How to be a bridge between 2 worlds," the old woman replied. "The time of great changes is coming. The white soldiers push from the east. Your Mexican government weakens, and our people must choose between hiding in the mountains forever or finding a new way to survive. Your son will help us find that way." Over the following days, Maria watched her quiet, reserved child transform before her eyes. Miguel spent his mornings with the Apache boys, learning skills that seemed to come to him with impossible ease. He could track animals across rocky ground, read weather signs in the behavior of birds, and move through the desert with the silent grace of someone born to it. In the afternoons, he sat with Grandmother Moon and the other elders, listening to stories told in Apache, while somehow understanding far more than should have been possible. The old woman began teaching him about the spiritual beliefs of the tribe, about the relationship between humans and the natural world, and about the responsibilities that came with special gifts. Maria found herself divided between pride in her son's remarkable abilities and terror at what his transformation might mean. Each day, Miguel seemed to grow more Apache and less like the quiet Mexican boy she had raised. The change was not just in his skills and language, but in his entire bearing. He walked taller, spoke with more confidence, and carried himself with the quiet dignity she had seen in the Apache warriors. On the 5th day of their captivity, Red Wolf approached Maria with news that made her blood run cold. "Riders approach from the east," he announced. "Mexican soldiers coming this way fast. They track our trail from your village." Maria's heart leaped with hope. Perhaps Carlos had returned to find their home empty and had ridden to the territorial capital for help. Maybe rescue was finally coming. But Red Wolf's next words crushed that hope. "We will move deeper into the mountains where the soldiers cannot follow. You and the boy will come with us. If we release you now, you will only lead more enemies to our hidden places." That night, as the Apache prepared to abandon their canyon stronghold, Maria realized with growing despair that rescue might mean death, not just for her and Miguel, but for all the Apache families who had shown them kindness. She was caught between two worlds, just as her son was, but without his mysterious ability to navigate both. The Apache camp erupted into controlled chaos as families prepared for immediate departure. Maria watched in amazement as an entire community dismantled their lives and packed everything onto horses and travois in less than 2 hours. Every movement was precise and practiced. The result of generations of people who had learned to survive by staying one step ahead of their enemies. Miguel moved among the Apache children as if he had been doing this all his life, helping to secure bundles and calm frightened horses. His natural silence, which had always worried Maria in their settled life, now seemed like a valuable skill. The boy who had barely spoken in 12 years had found his place among a people who valued the ability to move quietly and think carefully before acting. As the sun reached its highest point, Red Wolf gave the signal to move out. The column that emerged from the hidden canyon looked like a river of humanity flowing across the desert landscape. Warriors rode at the front and rear, while families with children and elders traveled in the protected center. Maria and Miguel were placed near Grandmother Moon, a position that Maria gradually realized was one of honor rather than captivity. The pace was punishing. The Apache could cover distances that would exhaust ordinary travelers, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and check their back trail. Maria, who had never ridden so far or so hard, found herself struggling to keep up despite the sturdy horse she had been given. Her muscles ached, her throat was parched, and the relentless sun beat down on them without mercy. But Miguel seemed to thrive under the harsh conditions. His small body adapted to the rhythm of long-distance travel with remarkable speed. He learned to conserve water, to read the landscape for signs of danger, and to anticipate the needs of the group before orders were given. The Apache warriors began to treat him not as a child to be protected, but as a young person worthy of respect. On the second day of their flight, the pursuing Mexican soldiers finally appeared on the horizon behind them. Maria could see the dust cloud that marked their approach, and her heart was torn between hope for rescue and fear for the Apache families who had treated her with such unexpected kindness. Red Wolf called a halt and gathered his warriors for a quick council. The decision they reached was one that would haunt Maria's dreams for years to come. Half the war party would continue escorting the families toward the high mountain strongholds, while the other half would turn and engage the soldiers in a running fight designed to draw them away from the main group. "What about us?" Maria asked, though she dreaded the answer. "You and the boy continue with the families," Red Wolf replied. "If the soldiers catch us, they will kill many Apache to rescue 2 Mexican captives. Better that you remain safe with us until the danger passes." As the warriors prepared to split their forces, Miguel did something that shocked everyone present. He walked directly to Red Wolf and spoke in clear Apache, his young voice carrying an authority that seemed impossible for a 12-year-old boy. The conversation was brief but intense, with several warriors joining in, and Grandmother Moon watching with keen interest. Finally, Red Wolf turned to Maria with an expression of amazement. "Your son says the spirits have shown him a path through the mountains that the soldiers cannot follow. He says he can guide us to safety without anyone having to die." Maria stared at her son in disbelief. "Miguel, what are you talking about? You have never been in these mountains before. How could you possibly know secret paths?" Miguel looked at his mother with eyes that seemed far older than his 12 years. When he spoke, it was in Spanish, but his words carried the cadence and rhythm of Apache speech patterns. "The land speaks to those who know how to listen, Mama. I have been listening all my life, but I never understood what I was hearing until now." Grandmother Moon approached the boy and placed her weathered hands on his shoulders. She spoke to him in Apache for several minutes, asking questions that seemed to probe the depth of his mysterious knowledge. Finally, she nodded and turned to address the assembled warriors. "The boy carries true vision," she announced. "The spirits have marked him as a guide between worlds. We will follow where he leads." The decision to trust a 12-year-old boy with the lives of an entire Apache band was unprecedented. But Maria could see that something about Miguel had convinced even the most skeptical warriors. Perhaps it was the quiet confidence in his voice or the way he described geographical features he should never have seen. Whatever the reason, Red Wolf gave the order to follow Miguel's guidance. The path the boy led them on was unlike anything Maria had ever imagined. Instead of following the obvious mountain passes where soldiers might pursue them, Miguel guided the group through a series of narrow canyons and hidden valleys that seemed to exist in a world apart from the surrounding desert. Water appeared where it seemed impossible, and shelter could be found in places that looked barren from a distance. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the pursuing soldiers fell farther behind. The dust cloud that had marked their approach gradually disappeared, and by evening it was clear that the Mexican force had either lost the trail or given up the pursuit as too dangerous. That night, camped in a hidden meadow surrounded by towering peaks, the Apache held a ceremony unlike anything Maria had ever witnessed. Warriors who had fought in dozens of battles gathered around a sacred fire while Grandmother Moon and the other elders conducted rituals that reached back to the very beginning of their people's history. Miguel was called forward to sit beside the fire, and Maria watched in awe as the tribal elders marked his face with sacred paint and spoke words of blessing in the ancient Apache tongue. The boy who had been silent for 12 years answered their chants with words that seemed to flow from some deep well of inherited knowledge. "What is happening to my son?" Maria whispered to one of the Apache women sitting beside her. "He is being recognized for what he has always been," the woman replied. "A child of two worlds blessed by the spirits to serve as a bridge when the time of great change arrives." The ceremony continued long into the night, with stories being told and songs being sung that spoke of ancient prophecies and the coming of a new age. Maria understood little of the Apache language, but she could feel the power and solemnity of the occasion. Whatever was happening to Miguel was not just about escaping from soldiers or finding hidden paths through the mountains. It was about destiny, about purposes that had been set in motion long before either of them was born. When the ceremony finally ended, Miguel returned to sit beside his mother. In the flickering firelight, she could see that something fundamental had changed in her son. The paint on his face made him look older, more serious, but it was his eyes that truly showed the transformation. They held a depth of understanding that seemed impossible for someone so young. "Miguel," she said softly, "I do not understand what is happening. Are you still my son?" Miguel reached out and took her hand, his small fingers warm and reassuring. When he spoke, his voice carried both the gentleness she remembered and a new strength that took her breath away. "I will always be your son, Mama. But I am also something more now. The Apache have helped me understand what I was meant to become. Soon I will need to use that understanding to help both our peoples survive what is coming." Maria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "What is coming, my son?" Miguel looked up at the star-filled sky, and when he answered, his words seemed to carry the weight of prophecy. "A time when being Mexican or Apache will not matter as much as being human. A time when only those who can build bridges between enemies will survive." As Maria lay down to sleep that night, she realized that her quiet, simple life in San Rafael was gone forever. Whatever Miguel was becoming, whatever destiny awaited him among the Apache, she was now part of it too. The question that haunted her dreams was whether she would be strong enough to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The mountain stronghold where the Apache band finally made their temporary camp was a place that seemed to exist outside of ordinary time. Hidden valleys connected by narrow passes created a network of secret refugees where entire communities could disappear from the outside world. Ancient pictographs on canyon walls told stories of other peoples who had found sanctuary in these same mountains centuries before. Maria had been with the Apache for 2 weeks now, and each day brought new revelations about her son's extraordinary transformation. Miguel no longer seemed like the quiet, uncertain boy she had raised. Under the guidance of Grandmother Moon and the tribal elders, he was developing abilities that defied rational explanation. He could predict weather changes days in advance, locate water sources in the driest landscape, and communicate with animals in ways that amazed even experienced Apache hunters. But it was his growing role as a bridge between cultures that truly astounded Maria. Miguel had begun serving as a translator not just of languages, but of entire ways of thinking. When disputes arose between different Apache clans in the band, the boy who had barely spoken for 12 years could somehow find words that helped opposing sides understand each other. One morning, as Maria watched Miguel demonstrate tracking techniques to a group of Apache children, a commotion arose from the camp's eastern lookout point. A rider was approaching at full speed, and the warriors quickly prepared for possible trouble. But as the lone horseman drew closer, Red Wolf's tense expression changed to one of recognition and concern. The rider was Young Eagle, one of the scouts who had been watching the movements of Mexican and American forces in the lower valleys. His horse was lathered with sweat, and his face bore the grim expression of someone carrying terrible news. After quickly caring for his exhausted mount, Young Eagle gathered the tribal leaders around him and began to speak in rapid Apache. Even without understanding the words, Maria could see that his report was causing alarm among the warriors. Voices rose in urgent debate, and she caught glimpses of gestures pointing toward the valleys below and the distant horizon. Miguel, who had been helping the younger children practice with their small bows, suddenly stopped what he was doing and walked directly toward the group of arguing adults. Without hesitation, he joined the circle of warriors and elders, taking a place that should have been reserved for grown men with years of battle experience. Grandmother Moon noticed the boy's presence and gestured for the others to listen as Miguel began to speak. His words in Apache were fluent now, carrying the rhythm and intonation of someone who had been born to the language. The effect on the assembled leaders was immediate and dramatic. The urgent arguing stopped, and every face turned toward the 12-year-old boy with expressions of amazement and growing respect. Red Wolf finally approached Maria, his weathered features showing a mixture of awe and concern. "Your son has just done something that I have never seen in 30 years of warfare." Young Eagle brought news that a large force of American soldiers is marching toward this region, while Mexican troops are moving up from the south. "We are caught between two armies, both of which consider us enemies." Maria felt her heart sink. "What does that mean for us?" "It means we face a choice between fighting battles we cannot win, or fleeing deeper into the mountains where winter will kill the children and elders," Red Wolf replied grimly. "But your son has proposed a third option, one so dangerous that it borders on madness." Before Maria could ask what Miguel had suggested, the boy himself approached them, his young face showing a determination that was both inspiring and terrifying. When he spoke, it was in Spanish for his mother's benefit, but his words carried the formal cadence of Apache council speech. "Mama, I have told the leaders that I can go to both armies and speak for the Apache people. The spirits have shown me that this conflict comes from fear and misunderstanding, not from true hatred. If someone can help the soldiers see that the Apache are not their real enemies, perhaps bloodshed can be avoided." Maria stared at her son in horror. "Miguel, you are 12 years old. You cannot walk into armed camps and expect grown men to listen to you." "But I must try," Miguel replied with quiet conviction. "The visions I have been having show me terrible things if this path is not taken. Villages burned, families destroyed, children left orphaned in the desert. I cannot stand by and watch such suffering when I might prevent it." Grandmother Moon had been listening to the conversation, and now she stepped forward to place her hands on Miguel's shoulders. "The boy speaks truth," she said in her careful Spanish. "He has been marked by the spirits for this purpose. To deny his calling would bring misfortune to all our peoples." The debate that followed lasted for hours. Warriors argued that sending a child to negotiate with hostile armies was both hopeless and cruel. Others pointed out that traditional Apache resistance had already failed. The bands were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of places to hide. If Miguel's mysterious gifts offered even a small chance of avoiding catastrophe, shouldn't that chance be taken? Red Wolf, who commanded respect from all factions, finally called for silence. "The boy has shown us powers that we do not fully understand, but that have already saved our lives. If he believes the spirits are calling him to this task, then we must consider his words carefully." "But he cannot go alone," Maria protested. "If you must send him on this impossible mission, at least send warriors to protect him." Miguel shook his head firmly. "I must go alone, Mama. Warriors would be seen as a threat, but a single boy might be seen as curiosity rather than danger. Besides, the visions have shown me that this is something I must face by myself." The final decision came from an unexpected source. Several of the Apache children, who had been listening from the edges of the adult gathering, stepped forward to speak. These young people, some barely older than Miguel himself, had witnessed his remarkable abilities firsthand. They spoke of his uncanny knowledge of hidden paths, his ability to calm frightened animals, and the way he seemed to understand things that no one had taught him. "He is not like other children," declared Swifthawk, a boy of 14 who was already being trained as a warrior. "The spirits speak through him in ways we have never seen. If he says this is his path, then we must trust in powers greater than our own understanding. That evening, as the Apache prepared for what might be their final night in the mountain stronghold, Miguel spent long hours in conversation with Grandmother Moon and the other elders. They shared with him the deepest secrets of Apache diplomacy, the traditional phrases and gestures that had been used for generations when seeking peace with enemies. Maria watched these preparations with a growing sense of dread. Her quiet son, who had never been away from her side for more than a few hours, was preparing to walk alone into deadly danger. The rational part of her mind screamed that this was madness, that no 12-year-old child should be asked to carry such responsibility. But another part of her, a deeper instinct that she was only beginning to trust, whispered that Miguel was no ordinary child. The evidence of his extraordinary gifts was undeniable. His mysterious knowledge of Apache language and customs, his ability to navigate unknown terrain, his uncanny understanding of both human and animal behavior. Perhaps the Apache elders were right to believe that he had been chosen for purposes beyond normal understanding. As the night deepened, Miguel came to sit beside his mother near their small fire. For a long time they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the clear mountain air. When he finally spoke, his voice carried both the innocence of childhood and the weight of destiny. "Mama, I know you are afraid for me. I am afraid too. But the visions I have been having are so clear, so powerful, that I cannot ignore them. I see a path where Apache children grow up safe in their own lands, where Mexican families like ours are not caught between warring armies, where American settlers find room to build their new lives without destroying others." Maria reached out to stroke her son's dark hair, marveling at how much he had changed in just 2 weeks. "And you believe you can make such a future possible?" Miguel looked up at her with eyes that reflected the firelight like pools of ancient wisdom. "I believe I must try, Mama. The spirits have given me gifts that I am only beginning to understand, but I know they were not given to me for my own benefit. They were given so that I could help heal the wounds between peoples." That night, Maria lay awake staring at the star-filled sky, knowing that when morning came, her son would begin the most dangerous journey of his young life. She prayed to every saint she could remember, but she also found herself offering prayers to the Apache spirits that seemed to have claimed her boy. If Miguel was truly destined for this impossible mission, she could only hope that the same forces that had guided him this far would keep him safe in the trials ahead. Miguel met the colonel's gaze steadily. "I understand, sir, but I am not deceiving you. The Apache want peace, and they are willing to accept reasonable terms to achieve it. The question is whether Mexico is wise enough to choose peace over pointless bloodshed." As Miguel prepared to leave the Mexican camp, Colonel Rodriguez approached him one final time. "Boy, I have fought in many wars and dealt with many kinds of people. There is something unusual about you, something that I cannot quite understand. Who are you really?" Miguel paused before answering, then spoke words that would haunt the colonel's thoughts for years to come. "I am someone who has learned to listen to voices that most people cannot hear, Colonel. The spirits of this land cry out for peace between all its children. I am simply trying to help that peace become possible." As Miguel rode away from the Mexican camp toward his next and even more dangerous encounter, he carried with him the weight of promises that could mean the difference between war and peace for thousands of people. Behind him, Colonel Rodriguez stood watching until the boy disappeared into the desert, wondering if he had just witnessed something miraculous or simply been manipulated by a very clever child. The American military encampment presented a far different scene than the Mexican force Miguel had just left. Where Colonel Rodriguez's soldiers had shown the casual discipline of men accustomed to frontier warfare, the American troops displayed the rigid organization of a professional army advancing across a continent. Canvas tents, arranged in perfect rows, sentries posted at regular intervals, and supplies stacked with mathematical precision all spoke of a military machine, confident in its power and purpose. Miguel approached the camp openly, his small figure visible for miles across the desert floor. The American sentries spotted him long before he reached their perimeter, and by the time he arrived at the outer picket line, word had already spread through the camp about the strange sight of a lone child riding toward them across hostile territory. The first soldier to challenge him was a young private from Ohio who had never seen a desert before joining this expedition. "Hold up there, boy," the soldier called out in English, then attempted the same command in broken Spanish. "What are you doing out here all alone?" Miguel responded in Spanish, explaining that he needed to speak with the commanding officer about urgent matters concerning Apache movements in the area. The private, who understood perhaps one word in 10, called for his sergeant, who in turn summoned an officer who spoke better Spanish. Lieutenant Williams was a West Point graduate who had studied military history and fancied himself an expert on Indian warfare. When he saw Miguel, a boy who appeared to be Mexican but who spoke of Apache affairs with unusual knowledge, his first assumption was that this was some kind of trap or deception. "Boy, I want you to tell me very slowly and very carefully how you came to be out here and what you think you know about Apache activities," Williams said in careful Spanish. Miguel repeated the same basic story he had told Colonel Rodriguez, but he could see that the American officer was far more suspicious than his Mexican counterpart had been. The lieutenant's questions were sharper, more focused on details that might reveal inconsistencies in Miguel's account. "You claim the Apache treated you well during your captivity," Williams said skeptically. "That contradicts everything we know about their treatment of prisoners. Why should we believe that you were not simply brainwashed or coerced into serving as their messenger?" Miguel had expected this reaction, and he chose his words carefully. "Lieutenant, I understand your suspicion, but consider this. If the Apache wanted to deceive you, would they send a 12-year-old boy who speaks no English? Would they not choose a messenger who could communicate more effectively with your soldiers?" Williams paused, recognizing the logic in Miguel's argument. "Very well. Assuming for a moment that your story is true, what exactly are you proposing?" "The Apache know that American forces are in this region, just as they know about the Mexican soldiers in the mountains," Miguel explained. "They have no desire to fight either army, but they will defend themselves if they are attacked. I am here to propose a way that conflict can be avoided." The lieutenant's expression grew more skeptical. "And what makes you think a child can negotiate matters that trained diplomats and military officers have been unable to resolve?" Miguel looked directly into Williams's eyes, and when he spoke, his voice carried the same quiet authority that had impressed Colonel Rodriguez. "Because I have no personal interest to protect, no political career to advance, no territory to claim. I care only about preventing unnecessary deaths and suffering." Something in the boy's manner gave Williams pause. Despite his youth, Miguel spoke with a conviction and clarity that was unusual even among experienced adults. The lieutenant decided that his commanding officer should hear this strange story personally. Colonel James Morrison commanded the American expedition with the methodical thoroughness that had made him successful in previous Indian campaigns. When Miguel was brought before him, Morrison's first reaction was irritation at having his time wasted with what appeared to be a minor curiosity. "Lieutenant Williams, I hope you have a good reason for interrupting my planning session to deal with a lost Mexican child," Morrison said curtly. But as Miguel began to speak, the colonel's attention sharpened rapidly. The boy's knowledge of Apache positions and movements was detailed and specific, far beyond what could be guessed or fabricated. More importantly, his description of the tactical situation facing both American and Mexican forces was accurate, in ways that suggested he had inside information about both armies. "Young man," Morrison said after listening to Miguel's initial presentation, "you seem to know a great deal about military movements in this region. That knowledge could be extremely valuable to the United States Army, regardless of how you acquired it." Miguel sensed the direction of the colonel's thoughts and spoke quickly to redirect the conversation. "Colonel Morrison, I have not come here to sell information or to serve as a spy for any army. I have come to propose a way that American forces can achieve their objectives without fighting battles that would cost many lives." Morrison leaned back in his camp chair and studied the boy with new interest. "Explain." "The Apache you are pursuing are not raiders or warriors seeking to attack American settlements," Miguel said carefully. "They are families trying to find safe places to continue their traditional way of life. If the United States could guarantee them territory where they would not be disturbed, they would willingly avoid all contact with American citizens." Colonel Morrison's laugh was not unkind, but it carried no warmth. "Boy, I admire your humanitarian impulses, but you clearly do not understand the realities of territorial expansion. The United States has claimed this region as part of its national destiny. There is no room for autonomous Indian territories that could serve as bases for future resistance. Miguel had expected this response, and he was prepared for it. Colonel, what if I could show you that cooperation with the Apache would serve American interests better than conquest? I'm listening, Morrison said, though his tone remained skeptical. Miguel spoke for the next 20 minutes, outlining a vision that seemed to come from sources beyond his 12 years of experience. He described how Apache knowledge of desert survival could help American settlers adapt to the harsh environment. He explained how Apache networks of information and trade could benefit American merchants and explorers. He painted a picture of a frontier where cooperation replaced conflict, where different peoples contributed their unique strengths to building something new and better. As Miguel spoke, Colonel Morrison found himself drawn into the boy's vision despite his professional skepticism. There was something compelling about the way this child described complex political and economic relationships, something that suggested a depth of understanding that transcended formal education. You speak well, boy, Morrison said finally. But you are asking me to abandon military objectives in favor of untested theories about cooperation with hostile Indians. My orders are clear. I am to secure this territory for American settlement and remove any threats to that settlement. But what if there were no threats to remove? Miguel asked urgently. What if the Apache could become allies rather than enemies? Think of the resources you would save, the lives you would preserve, the goodwill you would create for future American expansion. Morrison was quiet for a long time, studying maps and considering possibilities that he had never been taught to imagine at West Point. Finally, he looked up at Miguel with an expression that mixed respect with frustration. Boy, I cannot make the kind of decisions you are asking for. Treaties and territorial arrangements must be negotiated by civilian authorities with proper legal standing. I am a military officer following orders, not a diplomat with authority to reshape national policy. Miguel felt his heart sink, but he pressed on with desperate determination. Then send word to those authorities, Colonel. Request permission to explore alternatives to military conquest. At the very least, delay any major operations until you can receive guidance from Washington. And what guarantee do I have that this delay would not simply give the Apache time to prepare stronger defenses or call in reinforcements? Morrison asked. Miguel's answer came from the deepest part of his being, drawing on visions and intuitions that he was only beginning to understand. Because the Apache are not your real enemies, Colonel. Your real challenges in this territory will come from the land itself, the distances, the climate, the difficulty of maintaining supply lines across hundreds of miles of desert. The Apache could help you meet those challenges, but only if you approach them as potential partners rather than obstacles to be eliminated. Colonel Morrison stared at the boy for a long moment, then called for his aide. Send a message to territorial headquarters, requesting clarification of our mission parameters regarding negotiations with local Indian populations. Include a full report of this conversation and ask for guidance on how to proceed. As Miguel prepared to leave the American camp, Colonel Morrison walked with him toward the edge of the encampment. Boy, I have been a soldier for 20 years, and I have never encountered anyone quite like you. Whether your proposals prove practical or not, you have given me much to think about. Miguel mounted his horse and looked down at the colonel with eyes that seemed far older than his years. Colonel Morrison, the spirits of this land have shown me visions of what could be if people of goodwill choose cooperation over conflict. I pray that wisdom will prevail in both Mexico City and Washington. As Miguel rode away from the American camp toward the mountains where his Apache family waited, he carried with him the fragile hope that he had planted seeds of peace in minds that had been prepared only for war. Behind him, Colonel Morrison stood watching until the boy disappeared into the desert, wondering if he had just encountered a remarkable young person or something more mysterious than he cared to contemplate. The sun was setting as Miguel began his climb back toward the Apache stronghold, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that seemed to promise either triumph or tragedy. Tomorrow would bring the answers that would determine whether his impossible mission had succeeded or failed, whether the voices that had guided him were truly wise or merely the delusions of a child who had been asked to carry burdens beyond his understanding. Apache camp was silent with tension when Miguel finally returned. As the first stars appeared in the desert sky, Maria rushed to embrace her son, her relief at his safe return mixed with desperate anxiety about what his mission might have accomplished. Around them, warriors and elders gathered in the flickering light of cook fires, their faces showing the strain of a day spent waiting for news that could determine their fate. Red Wolf approached, Miguel with the gravity of a leader who understood that the next few minutes might decide whether his people lived or died. "Tell us, young spirit walker. Did the armies listen to your words?" Miguel dismounted slowly, his small body showing the exhaustion of a day that had demanded more from him than most adults would face in a lifetime. But when he spoke, his voice carried the same quiet strength that had impressed both colonels. "They listened, Red Wolf. Whether they truly heard remains to be seen." Grandmother Moon came forward and placed her weathered hands on Miguel's shoulders, looking into his eyes with the piercing gaze of someone who could read spirits as easily as others read written words. What she saw there seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded slowly and spoke to the assembled Apache in their own tongue. "The boy has planted seeds," she announced. "But seeds must have time to grow, and the ground must be prepared to receive them. We must be patient and wise in the days ahead." Miguel described his encounters with both armies, speaking first in Apache for the benefit of the warriors and elders, then translating key points into Spanish for his mother. As he talked, Maria watched the faces around the fire and saw hope, struggling with skepticism and expressions that had learned to expect disappointment from promises made by outsiders. Both commanders seemed willing to consider alternatives to warfare. Miguel concluded, "But they are soldiers following orders from distant capitals. The real decisions will be made by men who have never seen this desert, who know nothing of Apache families or the cost of mountain warfare." Red Wolf's response was practical and sobering. "How long before we know if your words have borne fruit?" "Days, perhaps weeks," Miguel admitted. "Messages must travel to Mexico City and Washington. Officials must debate options they have never considered before. Meanwhile, both armies remain in position, ready to advance if diplomacy fails." The war leader nodded grimly. "Then we must prepare for both possibilities. If peace comes, we will be ready to honor our agreements. If war comes, we will be ready for that as well." Over the following days, Miguel seemed to retreat into himself, spending long hours in meditation with Grandmother Moon and the other spiritual leaders of the band. Maria watched her son with growing concern as he appeared to wrestle with burdens that no child should have to carry. The transformation that had begun when they first arrived among the Apache was accelerating, taking Miguel further from the quiet boy she had raised and closer to something she struggled to understand. On the fourth day after Miguel's return, young Eagle arrived with news that sent ripples of excitement through the camp. A messenger had come from the Mexican forces, requesting a meeting between Colonel Rodriguez and Apache representatives to discuss terms for avoiding conflict. The colonel's message specifically requested that the boy who speaks for the spirits be present at any negotiations. Red Wolf called an immediate council to decide how to respond to this unprecedented invitation. Warriors who had never trusted white or Mexican promises argued that it was obviously a trap designed to capture or kill Apache leaders. Others pointed out that the invitation proved Miguel's mission had achieved something remarkable. For the first time in generations, an army was asking to talk rather than simply demanding surrender. Miguel's voice cut through the debate with quiet authority. "We must go," he said simply, "not because we trust Colonel Rodriguez completely, but because this may be our only chance to show that Apache people desire peace more than they desire war." The council that night lasted until dawn, with arguments flowing back and forth like desert winds. In the end, the decision came down to a vote of confidence in Miguel himself. Did the Apache leaders trust the boy's mysterious gifts enough to risk their lives on his judgment? Grandmother Moon cast the deciding voice. "The spirits brought this child to us for purposes we are only beginning to understand. If we do not trust their guidance now, when will we ever trust it?" The meeting with Colonel Rodriguez was arranged for the following afternoon at a neutral location, a natural amphitheater formed by red rock walls where Apache and Mexican negotiators could talk while their respective forces remained safely separated. Miguel rode with Red Wolf and 2 other senior warriors, while Maria was allowed to accompany them as the boy's family representative. Colonel Rodriguez arrived with a small escort, his manner suggesting a man who was taking an enormous professional risk. As the two groups faced each other across the sandy floor of the amphitheater, The Mexican officer's eyes kept returning to Miguel with an expression that mixed respect with puzzlement. "Boy," Rodriguez said finally, "I have received communications from Mexico City that I would not have believed possible. My superiors are actually willing to consider alternatives to military conquest of this territory." Miguel felt his heart leap with hope, but he kept his expression calm. "What alternatives are they willing to consider, Colonel?" Rodriguez unfolded a document from his saddlebags and began to read terms that no one present had expected to hear. The Mexican government was prepared to offer the Apache designated territories, where they could live according to their traditional ways, in exchange for agreements to avoid raids on Mexican settlements and to provide assistance in dealing with American territorial expansion. Red Wolf listened to the translation with growing amazement. "They are offering us legal recognition of our right to exist? This is beyond what we dared hope for." But Miguel sensed complications beneath the surface of the colonel's offer. "What does Mexico expect in return for this recognition, Colonel? There must be conditions that you have not yet mentioned." Rodriguez's expression grew more serious. "Mexico faces the reality of American expansion whether we acknowledge it or not. The government believes that Apache cooperation could help defend Mexican interests against American territorial claims." The truth behind Mexico's offer became clear as Rodriguez continued reading. The Mexican government wanted Apache warriors to serve as auxiliary forces in any future conflict with American armies, using their knowledge of desert warfare to harassment enemy supply lines and communications. Red Wolf's face darkened as he understood the implications. "They want us to become Mexico's attack dogs against the Americans. This is not peace. This is simply choosing which army we fight for." Miguel felt the fragile hope of the past few days crumbling, but he forced himself to think beyond the immediate disappointment. "Colonel Rodriguez, what would happen if the Apache refused to serve as auxiliary forces but still agreed to respect Mexican settlements?" "Without military cooperation, I doubt my government would be interested in formal recognition," Rodriguez admitted. "They see little benefit in protecting Apache territory if Apache warriors will not help protect Mexican interests." The negotiations continued for hours, with both sides exploring compromises that might bridge the gap between Mexican expectations and Apache limitations. Miguel found himself serving not just as a translator, but as a creative mediator, suggesting solutions that neither side had considered. Finally, as the sun began to set over the red rock walls, Miguel proposed an arrangement that took everyone by surprise. Instead of serving as auxiliary forces for Mexico against America, the Apache could serve as neutral mediators between the two expanding powers, using their intimate knowledge of the terrain to prevent conflicts that neither side really wanted. Both Mexico and America want to avoid costly desert warfare, Miguel argued. Apache leaders who understand both cultures could serve as diplomatic messengers, helping to resolve territorial disputes before they escalate into battles. Colonel Rodriguez was quiet for a long time, considering possibilities that his military training had never prepared him to imagine. Finally, he nodded slowly. "It is an interesting proposal, one that would require approval from both Mexico City and Washington, but interesting nonetheless." As the formal negotiations concluded with agreements to continue discussions, Miguel experienced a vision more vivid than any he had received before. He saw himself not as a child caught between warring armies, but as the first of a new generation that would build bridges between cultures that had known only conflict. The vision showed him Apache children learning Spanish and English, while Mexican and American children learned the ancient wisdom of the desert peoples. He saw trading posts where different peoples brought their unique skills and knowledge to create prosperity for all. He saw a future where the vast landscapes of the American Southwest could support many different ways of life without the constant threat of warfare. When the vision faded, Miguel found himself surrounded by adults who were staring at him with expressions of wonder and concern. He had been standing perfectly still for several minutes, his eyes focused on horizons that only he could see. "What did you see, young spirit walker?" Grandmother Moon asked softly. Miguel looked around at the faces of people who had learned to trust his impossible gifts, then spoke words that would echo in their memories for generations to come. "I saw the birth of a new world, Grandmother. A world where different peoples do not have to destroy each other to survive. It will take time, perhaps many generations, but it will come." As they rode back toward the Apache stronghold, Maria finally found the courage to ask the question that had been haunting her for weeks. Miguel, what will happen to us when this is over? Can we ever go back to our old life in San Rafael? Miguel turned in his saddle to look at his mother, and she saw in his eyes the wisdom of someone who had glimpsed possibilities beyond ordinary understanding. We cannot go back, Mama, but we can go forward to something better than what we left behind. The spirits have work for us to do, and that work has only just begun. Behind them, the Apache stronghold nestled among towering peaks that had sheltered countless generations of people who had learned to find hope in the most impossible circumstances. Ahead lay challenges that would test everything Miguel had learned about building bridges between different worlds. But for the first time since this strange journey began, both mother and son felt certain that they were moving toward a future filled with possibilities, rather than away from a past that could never be recovered. Dawn broke over the mountains with a clarity that seemed to promise either triumph or tragedy. Miguel woke before the sun appeared, moving quietly so as not to disturb his sleeping mother. He had spent the night in vivid dreams that felt more like visions, seeing himself walking between vast armies while voices in languages he was only beginning to understand whispered guidance in his ears. The Apache camp was already stirring as Miguel made his final preparations. Red Wolf had provided him with a sturdy horse and enough supplies for several days of travel, though everyone hoped his mission would not take nearly that long. Grandmother Moon gave him a small leather pouch containing sacred items that she said would help him remain strong in the face of danger. Remember, the old woman told him as she tied the pouch around his neck, you carry not just your own courage but the hopes of all our people. The spirits that guide you are ancient and powerful, but they work through human hearts and voices. You must trust in both their wisdom and your own. Maria watched these preparations with a heart that felt ready to break. In the space of 2 weeks, her quiet son had been transformed into something she barely recognized, a young person carrying responsibilities that would challenge grown men. Yet she could not deny the evidence of her own eyes. Miguel moved with a confidence and purpose that seemed impossible for his age, speaking with elders as an equal, and making decisions with the calm certainty of someone guided by powers beyond ordinary understanding. As the time for departure approached, the entire Apache band gathered to witness Miguel's leaving. Warriors who had fought in countless battles stood respectfully as the 12-year-old boy prepared to attempt what their weapons could not achieve. Children who had quickly accepted him as one of their own watched with wide eyes as their new friend prepared to walk into deadly danger on their behalf. Miguel mounted his horse with the easy grace that had developed during his time with the Apache. He looked down at his mother, and for a moment she saw in his face a glimpse of the uncertain child he had been just days before.
Mama, if something happens to me, nothing will happen to you,
Maria interrupted fiercely. The same spirits that brought you to these people will keep you safe until you can return to us. Miguel smiled at her words, but his expression remained serious. If something does happen, remember that everything that has occurred was meant to be. My silence for all those years was not emptiness, it was preparation. I was listening, learning, waiting for the time when the words I needed would come to me. With those words, Miguel turned his horse toward the narrow trail that would take him down from the mountains toward the valleys, where two armies waited in ignorance of each other's presence. As he rode away, Maria felt as if part of her own soul was departing with him, leaving her incomplete and afraid. The journey down from the mountain stronghold took Miguel most of the morning. As he descended, the landscape changed from pine forests and rocky peaks to the scrub brush and desert plants of the lower elevations. With each mile, he moved farther from the Apache world that had embraced him, and closer to the dangerous reality of military forces preparing for conflict. His first encounter came sooner than expected. As he rounded a bend in the trail, Miguel found himself face to face with two Mexican soldiers who had been sent ahead as scouts. Their horses blocked the narrow path and their hands moved instinctively toward their weapons when they saw the approaching rider. "Alto," one of the soldiers commanded, raising his rifle. "Who are you, boy? What are you doing in these mountains?" Miguel raised his hands to show he carried no weapons, then answered in the polite Spanish his mother had taught him. "I am Miguel Santos from the village of San Rafael. I seek to speak with your commanding officer on a matter of great importance." The soldiers exchanged glances, clearly unsure how to respond to a 12-year-old boy who appeared alone in territory known to be controlled by hostile Apache. After a brief discussion, they decided to escort Miguel to their camp rather than turn him away. Perhaps their officers would know what to make of this strange encounter. The Mexican military camp was a scene of organized chaos. Soldiers cleaned weapons and checked equipment, while officers studied maps and argued over strategy. The commander, Colonel Rodriguez, was a weathered veteran who had spent years fighting various insurgencies across the Mexican territories. When Miguel was brought before him, the colonel's first reaction was one of exasperation. "What is the meaning of this?" Rodriguez demanded. "I have no time for children and their games. Take the boy back to wherever he came from and tell his parents to keep him away from military operations." But Miguel stepped forward with a composure that was remarkable for his age. "Colonel Rodriguez, I come with information that could save the lives of your soldiers and prevent a tragedy that would bring dishonor to Mexico." Something in the boy's tone caused the colonel to pause and study him more carefully. Miguel's clothes showed signs of travel, and there was something in his dark eyes that suggested experiences far beyond his apparent years. "Very well, boy. You have 1 minute to explain yourself before I have you removed from this camp." Miguel spoke quickly but clearly, describing the Apache band hidden in the mountains and their growing desperation as they found themselves caught between advancing Mexican and American forces. He explained that the Apache were not seeking war, but were simply trying to protect their families from the chaos that had engulfed the region. "And why should I believe the word of a child about Apache intentions?" Rodriguez asked skeptically. "How would a boy from San Rafael know anything about hostile Indian movements?" "Because I have been with them for 2 weeks," Miguel replied calmly. "They took my mother and me from our village, but they treated us with honor rather than cruelty. I have seen their children playing, their elders teaching, their warriors preparing to defend rather than attack. These are not savage raiders, Colonel. They are families trying to survive in a world that has forgotten how to make peace." The colonel's expression shifted from skepticism to sharp attention. "You were captured by Apache and then released? That is highly unusual, boy. Most captives are either killed or held permanently." "I was not released," Miguel said. "I was allowed to come here because the Apache believe I can help prevent unnecessary bloodshed. They know that your soldiers are brave and well-armed, but they also know that fighting in these mountains will cost many lives on both sides." Rodriguez studied the boy for a long moment, then gestured for his senior officers to join the conversation. The tactical situation was indeed concerning. They were operating in unfamiliar terrain against an enemy that knew every rock and canyon. If there was any chance of avoiding a costly mountain campaign, it deserved serious consideration. "Assuming I believe your story," the colonel said carefully, "what exactly are you proposing?" Miguel took a deep breath before answering. The words that came from his mouth carried a wisdom that seemed impossible for someone so young. "The Apache want only to be left in peace to raise their children according to their own ways. They have no interest in raiding Mexican settlements or interfering with your military operations. If you could guarantee them safe passage to territories where they would not threaten anyone, they would be willing to avoid all contact with Mexican forces." One of the junior officers laughed dismissively. "And we should trust the word of savages who make war on innocent civilians?" Miguel turned toward the officer with eyes that seemed to flash with inner fire. When he spoke, his voice carried an authority that made everyone present fall silent. "Have you ever seen Apache children learning to ride horses, sir? Have you watched Apache women teaching their daughters to weave baskets and prepare food for their families? Have you listened to Apache elders telling stories that preserve the wisdom of countless generations?" The officer's face reddened with embarrassment, but Miguel continued without giving him a chance to respond. "You call them savages because you have never seen them as human beings with the same hopes and fears that drive all of us. The Apache value courage, loyalty to family, and respect for the natural world. These are not the values of savages, but of a proud people trying to preserve their way of life." Colonel Rodriguez held up a hand to silence any further interruptions. "Boy, you speak with remarkable conviction for someone so young. But even if I were inclined to consider your proposals, I have no authority to negotiate treaties with hostile Indians. Such decisions must be made by higher authorities." "Then write to those authorities," Miguel replied urgently. "Send word to Mexico City that there is a chance for peace if they will take it. Meanwhile, order your soldiers to avoid the high mountain passes where conflict would be most likely. Give diplomacy a chance to work before you resort to warfare." The colonel was quiet for a long time, studying maps and considering options that he had not previously thought possible. Finally, he looked up at Miguel with an expression that mixed respect with puzzlement. "I will send a message to my superiors recommending that they consider your proposal. But understand this, boy. If you are deceiving me, if this is some kind of Apache trick, the consequences will be severe."